My son's face went the color of dishwater the second he cleared my front door. He came in the way he always did anymore. Shoulders first, already halfway through a sentence. A leather folder tucked under one arm and a man in a gray suit trailing 2 steps behind him. Then he saw her. He stopped so fast the lawyer nearly clipped his heels. Nobody said anything. The furnace kicked on. The clock on the mantel did its little tick. And my son just stood there in the middle of my living room, staring at the woman sitting in the wingback chair next to my recliner, holding one of my chipped coffee mugs like she'd been coming by every morning for 30 years. "Dad," he said finally. His voice had gone thin as paper. What is she doing here?" I looked over at Corinne. She had her reading glasses pushed up on her head and a legal pad balanced on her knee, and she wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something settled in her face. She took a slow sip of coffee and didn't say a word. She's always been better than me at silence. 40 years of watching her handle vendors and payroll, and men who thought they could bully a woman out of what she was owed, and I never once saw her fill a quiet room, just because it was quiet. I set my own mug down on the side table. "Afternoon, son," I said. "You want coffee? There's plenty." He didn't answer. The blood had gone right out of him. Standing there in his good shirt with that folder full of papers. He'd driven 40 minutes to make me sign. My boy looked more scared than I'd seen him since he was 14. And I had to tell him his mother wasn't coming home from the hospital. Funny thing is, 3 months before that afternoon, I'd have given just about anything to get him to come by. Let me back up. My name is Ward Halloran. I'm 69 years old, and I live outside Lowell, Michigan, about 20 minutes east of Grand Rapids, in a story-and-a-half house I bought the same year Jimmy Carter left office. For a little over 4 decades, I ran a custom millwork shop. Cabinets, built-ins, staircases, church pews, the occasional bar top for a restaurant that wanted to look older than it was. Grand Rapids used to call itself Furniture City. And even after most of the big factories closed or moved south, there were still people around here who understood the difference between something a machine spat out in 9 minutes and something a man stood over for 2 weeks. Those were my people. I built for them. I started with one table saw, a rented bay behind a muffler shop, and about $1,100 I'd scraped together. By the time I sold it, I had a real building, 9 men on payroll, and a waiting list that ran 6 months deep. Nothing glamorous. I never had a boat or a second house or a wristwatch worth stealing. I drove the same trucks until they died, ate lunch out of a cooler, and put every extra dime somewhere it could grow quietly. When I finally sold the shop to 2 of my younger guys on a note, I figured life would go slow, and it did, some. My alarm clock stopped mattering. I started fishing on weekday mornings like a man of leisure. I found out retirement isn't really about doing nothing. It's about finally getting to pick. Most every Tuesday, I'd have breakfast with Sully down at the Depot Diner in town. Same corner booth, same waitress named Gail, who'd been slinging plates there since the Reagan years. Same order, 2 eggs over medium, rye toast and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since the Ford administration. I drove a 19-year-old Silverado with a cracked taillight I kept meaning to fix. It wasn't pretty. It started every morning, which was all I asked of it or anyone. I wasn't living like a man with money because, honestly, I never had. Some fellas spend their whole lives buying things so strangers will think well of them. I never understood the arithmetic of that, but it turned out somebody had been keeping a closer eye on me than I realized. My son, Nathan, he's 36 now. Smart kid, always was. Went to Michigan State, got into commercial real estate, married a woman named Delaney, who came from more money than we did and never quite let anybody forget it. They lived in one of those subdivisions out past Ada where every house has the same 3 shades of gray siding and a lawn service truck idling in the driveway on Thursdays. Big house. Big lease on a bigger SUV. And, I'd come to learn, a mortgage and a pile of other things that were a good deal bigger than the income holding them up. Nathan and I had been close once. Real close, especially after his mom died. Ellen went fast, pancreatic cancer. From the diagnosis to the funeral was a little under 5 months. Nathan was 14. There's no good age to lose your mother. But 14 is a special kind of cruel. Because you're old enough to understand exactly what you've lost, and too young to have anything to hold it up against. For years after, it was just the two of us learning how to run a house neither of us knew how to run. I made a lot of bad dinners. I went to a lot of Little League games and stood at a lot of parent-teacher conferences with sawdust still in my hair. We got through it. I always figured that got us through it together. Then somewhere along the way it started to slip. Nothing you could point at. No fight, no falling out. Just the slow drift. The phone calls got shorter. Birthdays turned into a text with a cake emoji. He'd say he was slammed at work, they were traveling, the kid had a thing, and they did have a kid. My granddaughter, Poppy, who's 7, and who I got to see about twice a year, which is its own particular ache I won't get into. For a long stretch, I blamed life. People get busy, that's just true. But after a while, the busyness started to have a shape to it, because every so often, out of a clear sky, Nathan would call and get real specific. "How's the old house holding up, Dad? You still climbing that ladder to clean the gutters yourself? You ever think about someplace with no stairs?" Little questions, harmless enough on their own. One night last winter, he called during a Lions game. They were losing, which back then was less remarkable than it is now, and after a few minutes of nothing, he said, "Hey, you still doing all your own money stuff? Bills and taxes and all that?" I laughed. Who else would be doing it? No reason. Just, making sure you're not stressed. Then he changed the subject to something about Poppy's soccer. I didn't think a thing of it. I wish to God I had. The call that woke me up came in March, and it didn't come from Nathan. A fella named Hank, who'd worked for me the better part of 20 years, called on a Saturday to shoot the breeze. Good Finnish carpenter, terrible poker player, could not keep a secret if you paid him. We talked about steelhead fishing on the Grand and about his knees, and about how the new owners were running the shop into the ground, in his opinion, which was probably half true. And then he got quiet, and I could hear him working up to something. "Ward," he said, "I gotta ask you something, and don't take it wrong. Go on. You feeling okay? Up here, I mean." He knocked on something, maybe his own head. In the noggin? I was standing at my kitchen window watching a cardinal work the feeder. "Last I checked," I said. "Why?" He blew out a long breath. "Nathan's been telling people you're slipping. Forgetting things. Getting confused, leaving the stove on. That kind of talk. Marge heard it at church and it got back to me and it didn't sit right. Figured you'd want to know somebody's saying it." I don't remember what I said back. I remember the cardinal flew off, and I stood there watching the empty feeder swing. I honestly thought for a second I'd misheard him. I hadn't. A week later, right on schedule, Nathan called, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, he was warm, cheerful, even. He asked about my health. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked, real casual, whether I'd ever gotten around to updating my will, because Delaney's father had just done all his estate stuff and it had gotten them thinking, everybody ought to have that squared away. God forbid something happens. Then he floated the idea of coming by. Not alone. He'd bring a lawyer he knew, just to help me get some paperwork organized. Real low-key. "Everybody should have this in place, Dad." I told him that sounded fine, but something in my gut had already gone cold and stayed that way. Here's the thing people get wrong about Corinne, and it's the thing my whole family got wrong about her for the better part of 20 years, so I might as well set it straight now. Corinne Ashby ran my office. That's the whole scandal. She started as a bookkeeper when the shop was still behind the muffler place, and she worked her way up to running everything that wasn't sawdust. The money, the contracts, the men who tried to stiff us, the bank that never wanted to lend to a shop like mine until she made them. She could catch a math error from across the room. She was sharp, and she was fair, and she did not suffer fools. And for a lot of years, she was the only person in my life who'd tell me flat out when I was being one. She was also a woman, and she was around, and Ellen was gone. And so somewhere along the line, my son decided in his head that Corinne was after me, or after Ellen's spot, or after the money. Teenagers build stories out of not much, and grown men keep them. He never came out and said it, but I could feel it every time she was in the room. When she retired and moved out to Prescott, Arizona, for her sister and the dry air, I could have sworn Nathan looked relieved. He didn't need to be. Corinne was my friend. She is my friend. In 38 years, there was never one single thing between us that Ellen herself wouldn't have poured a cup of coffee for. But I'd stopped trying to convince anyone of that a long time ago. You can't argue somebody out of a thing they decided when they were 15. We'd fallen down to Christmas cards and the odd phone call. So when everything started feeling wrong last winter, hers was the number I dialed. We talked for almost 2 hours. I told her about the questions, about Hank, about the memory rumor, about the sudden warmth. At first, I just wanted somebody to tell me I was imagining it. Somebody who knew me well enough to say, "Ward, you're being paranoid. Your boy loves you. Go take your pills and go to bed." She didn't say that. What she said was, "How fast can you get in to see a lawyer? A real one. Yours, not his. I don't have a lawyer. You do now," she said. "And Ward, before any of this goes further, I want you to do one more thing, and I want you to not fight me on it." "What?" "Go get your head checked. On purpose. A real evaluation, a neurologist, the whole 9 yards. Because the day this becomes a fight, the first thing that man's lawyer is going to say is that you're confused. And I want you to have a letter in your hand from a doctor that says otherwise, dated and signed, before you need it." I'll be honest, that one stung. Nobody wants to schedule a test to prove his own mind still works. But she was right, and I knew she was right. And 3 days later, I called a woman named Ruth Vander Molen, who came recommended by Sully's brother-in-law and turned out to be about the smartest person I'd talked to in a decade. And the week after that, I sat in a bright little office at the medical center off the East Beltline, while a Dr. Salazar had me draw clocks and repeat lists of words, and count backward from 100 by sevens, which I'll admit I had to slow down for, but so would you. 2 weeks later, I had a letter. Cognition intact, it said. No indication of impairment. In fact, Dr. Salazar wrote, "My scores were well above average for a man my age." I read that letter maybe 6 times. Then I put it in a folder Corinne had labeled in her tidy block printing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, which was steady. Corinne flew back to Michigan in April. She said it was to help me get organized. It was more than that, and we both knew it, but that's what we called it. The first thing she did was sit at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad and make me lay out everything I owned. The house, free and clear for a dozen years. The note the boys were paying me on the shop. The retirement accounts, the CDs, the savings I'd built up a boring $1 at a time. It came to more than most people who knew me would have guessed, and a lot less than I imagined Nathan had convinced himself of. Because the two of us had never once talked about it. I didn't raise my son to think about my death as a line item. The second thing she did was ask questions I hadn't thought to ask. Who had access to what? Who'd been asking? Who'd suddenly gotten interested? And as we worked through it, other pieces started drifting in from around the edges, the way they do in a town this size. A guy I'd built a mantle for years back mentioned, offhand, that he'd seen Nathan at some real estate investment seminar down in Grand Rapids. The kind that runs you a few $1,000s to teach you how to get rich flipping houses. Then Sully's wife heard from her cousin that Delaney had put their lake rental up for the season, which they'd never done. Then Ruth, doing her due diligence, pulled some things that are a matter of public record if you know where to look. And that's where it stopped being gossip. Because Ruth found that back in February, a month before Nathan ever called me sounding worried, somebody had opened a file with the county probate court asking about the process for a conservatorship. A conservatorship, for those lucky enough to have never dealt with one, is when a court decides a person can't manage his own affairs anymore and hands control of his money and his life over to somebody else. Somebody responsible. Somebody nearby. Somebody, say, like a concerned son. There was no completed petition. No judge had signed anything. But the inquiry was there, with a date on it, and the name attached to it was my son's. I sat at that table a long while and didn't say anything. Corinne didn't push. She just poured me more coffee I didn't drink. "Maybe he's just being careful," I finally said, "trying to plan ahead in case I really do go downhill someday." That's not a crime. Corinne looked at me the way you look at somebody you love, who's saying something you both know isn't true. You want that to be it, she said. I understand why. But he told the whole church you're already losing your mind, Ward. You don't lay that groundwork for us someday. She wasn't wrong. But God, I wanted her to be. That night I didn't sleep. I got up around 2 and made toast I didn't eat and stood over the sink eating it anyway in the dark, like a bachelor in some sad commercial. On the refrigerator was a picture from when Nathan was maybe 6, holding up a bluegill he'd caught off my father-in-law's dock, missing a front tooth, grinning like he'd landed a marlin. I put my thumb on the edge of it, and for one bad minute I thought about just signing whatever they brought me, just to make it go away, just to keep my son. I'm not proud of that minute. But I'd be lying if I left it out. The papers came the following Thursday, and the first thing that scared me was how ordinary they looked. They weren't some crude scheme scrawled on a napkin. They were clean and professional, tabbed and paper-clipped in a leather folder, with little colored flags on the signature lines. If you flip through them fast, they looked like exactly what Nathan said they were. Routine planning. A durable power of attorney. A healthcare directive. Some transfer language buried in the middle. In another family, maybe that's all they'd have been. Corinne and I went through every page at the kitchen table the next morning with the coffee and her yellow pad. And it was Ruth on the speakerphone who walked us through what the pretty language actually did. Legal papers don't announce danger with flashing lights. They hide it under words like prudent and necessary, and in the principal's best interest. But when you laid it all end to end, it came to this. If I signed, Nathan would have broad authority over my accounts, my property, and my investments the moment somebody credibly claimed I needed help managing them. And after the little file down at the probate court, I had a real clear idea of who'd be doing the claiming. Ruth called the lawyer, whose name was on the papers, a younger fella named Cole Alcott. She didn't threaten him. She just asked questions, polite as Sunday, while I sat across from Corinne with my arms folded, trying not to feel like a fool in my own kitchen. Mr. Alcott, Ruth said, what were you told about my client's condition? There was a pause. The family expressed some concerns about his ability to keep up with his affairs. Memory, confusion, that sort of thing. They indicated it was fairly urgent. I looked down at my own hands, their ugly hands, scarred and thick, a fingernail on the left one that's never grown right since a joiner caught it in 1994. But there wasn't a thing helpless about them. Did you meet with him? Ruth asked. Before you drew these up? Another pause, longer. No. I was told he'd already agreed in principle, and that time was a factor. I almost laughed, not because it was funny. I had not agreed in principle. I had agreed to hear my son out. There's an ocean between those two things, and my son had rowed clear across it without me. After the call ended, Ruth said the thing I already knew. That lawyer's not your villain, Ward. He got a story from a client, and he ran with it. Sloppy, maybe, but he's not the one who lied. I know, I said. Knowing didn't make it lighter. I carried those papers around in my head for days like a stone in my coat pocket. I'd be brushing my teeth and think about my boy standing up in front of people telling them I couldn't be trusted to turn off a stove. I'd be in line at Major and remember him asking, all sweet, whether I still handled my own money. I kept looking for the good version of him. That's what fathers do. We keep believing in the kid we raised, even when the man he became is sitting right there in the evidence. By the middle of the summer, I'd made up my mind. Not just about the papers, about all of it. The house, the money, what I wanted the rest of my life to actually be. But I didn't want a screaming match, and I sure didn't want lawyers billing each other across a table for 2 years while my granddaughter grew up, thinking her grandpa was a mean old man who cut her daddy off. I wanted the truth out in the open, in the daylight, in front of people, where it couldn't be twisted later into a story about a confused old man. So I threw a cookout. Every Labor Day for years I'd had folks over, neighbors, the diner crowd, a couple of my old shop guys. Whatever family showed up, nobody thought twice when the invitations went out. I called Nathan myself and made it sound like an olive branch, said I'd been thinking things over, said I wanted to talk about the paperwork with a clearer head. He accepted before I finished the sentence. That told me plenty. They still thought I was going to sign. The first Monday in September came up warm and bright, one of those last clean days of Michigan summer, before the light starts going gold and sad. I had the grill going by noon, brats and burgers, corn I'd picked up at the stand out on Fulton. Sully told the same fishing story he tells every year, word for word, and nobody stopped him. My neighbor Denny cornered a man from my church for 20 minutes about why his lawn looked better than everybody's. Poppy ran through the sprinkler with the neighbor kids in a swimsuit that had a unicorn on it, and every time I looked at her, my chest did something complicated. Nathan and Delaney showed up around 3. He shook my hand. She hugged me. Quick, the way you hug a piece of furniture you're pretending to like. And then Nathan did a slow scan of the backyard, the tables, the coolers, the faces, looking for something. Looking for who? I didn't say a word. Corinne pulled in about 20 minutes later. The second Nathan clocked her by the drink table, that easy summer look drained right off his face. Not enough for anybody else to catch. Plenty for me. I let the afternoon run. People ate and laughed, and the little kids got sticky, and somebody's dog got into the trash. Around 6, when the sun had dropped low enough to throw long shadows across the grass, and folks were leaning back in their chairs the way you do when you're full, I stood up and tapped my glass with a fork. Nothing dramatic, just enough. The talking trailed off. Everybody turned my way. Thanks for coming, all of you, I said. A few people smiled. I looked around at them, men I'd worked beside, women who'd fed me casseroles after Ellen died, my granddaughter with a popsicle running down her wrist. Then I looked at my son. Corinne and I have spent the last few months getting my affairs in order. Nathan sat up, so did Delaney. And I learned some things doing it, I said. So I figured, family being here and all, I'd just say them out loud. Save everybody the phone calls. The yard got quiet in a different way. Nobody knew where this was headed. Not yet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point at anyone. I just told it. I told them how it gotten back to me that folks were saying I was losing my memory. I watched a couple of heads turn. I told them about the papers and the power of attorney and the authority tucked into the middle pages. I told them about the file down at the probate court, dated in February, before anyone ever asked me how I was feeling. I didn't editorialize. I just laid the facts down one after another, flat, like planks, and let people walk across them and see where they went. You could watch it move across the yard. Confusion first, then a kind of squirming discomfort, then something colder, Dad. Nathan's voice cracked out of him. That's not. You're making it sound like something it wasn't. I looked at him, calm as I could manage. Then tell me what it was. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. He tried again. Still nothing. It's a hard thing to spin a story when 30 people can hear you. Delaney jumped in, chin up. This is so unfair. We were trying to protect you. From what? I asked. And that's when Nathan made the mistake. The kind people make when the ground's coming out from under them, and they grab for the nearest thing. He threw his hand up and he said it, too loud, too fast. From blowing through everything before there's anything left for us. The whole yard went dead silent. Even the kids seemed to feel it. Denny stopped mid-sentence with his beer halfway to his mouth. Poppy looked up from her popsicle. Nathan heard the words a half-second after they'd already left him, and I watched the horror land on his face as he understood that he'd said the one true thing out loud in front of everyone he knew. I let it sit a good long moment. Then I said, quiet. Well, there it is. I reached into the folder on the chair beside me. Not for show, I just wanted things on paper. I sold the house, I said. Nathan blinked. What? Closed on it in July. New folks take possession next month. Dad, what are you? Where are you going to live? Got a little place up on White Lake, near Whitehall. Cottage. 1 floor, no gutters to climb. I turned a page. I moved most of the rest into an irrevocable trust back in June. Ruth set it up. That means it's not really mine to hand over anymore, and it's sure not anybody's to take. Delaney had gone the color of the paper plates. Nathan just stared at me like the ground had tilted. And in a way, it had, because they'd spent the better part of a year planning around a pile of money that had quietly walked out the back door while they were busy telling the church I couldn't be trusted with it. Then I gave them the part I'd saved. And before anybody's mind runs off in the wrong direction, I said, glancing at Corinne, she's not getting a dime of it. Never asked to. Wouldn't take it if I begged her. Corinne actually smiled at that, the first real one all day. She's helping me run the thing. That's all she's ever been to me, and it's a damn sight more than most of you ever gave her credit for. Nathan's face was doing something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Then where's it going? I told him. Most of it's going to set up a fund, scholarships and a tool stipend for kids coming up through the trades, carpentry, welding, electrical, the building programs at the vocational center. Kids who work with their hands and don't have a dad who can float them. Ellen's name's on it. The Ellen Halloran Fund. My voice caught on her name, and I let it, because that's what built everything you were counting on. Not a windfall. A trade and 40 years of showing up. Nobody moved. Somewhere down the block, a screen door banged. And I want to tell you I felt triumphant, but that's not the word. What I felt was light. For months I'd been carrying the suspicion and the shame and the not knowing, and setting it down in front of everybody out loud was like putting down a load I'd carried so long. I'd forgotten my arms could hang straight. There's one more thing, I said, softer. And this part I hadn't planned to say, but I said it anyway. Because Poppy was standing there with her popsicle and her wet unicorn suit. I said a little aside, separate, in trust for Poppy. Her education when the time comes. Not through anybody, for her. I looked at Nathan when I said it, and I let him understand exactly what it meant. That I trusted my 7-year-old granddaughter with something I could no longer trust her father to pass along. That was the one that broke him, not the money he'd lost. The line I'd drawn around his own child passed him. He stood up. Delaney was already gathering her purse and her dignity. Neither of them looked at anybody. They walked out through the yard, past the grill, past the coolers, past all those people, and nobody stopped them and nobody said a word. A minute later, I heard the SUV door slam once, then again, then the engine, then nothing. I didn't chase him. First time in that boy's life, I didn't chase him. I just stood there in the last of the good light and breathed. The morning after, I woke before the sun the way I always do. And for about 10 seconds, everything was fine, and then I remembered. I lay there waiting to feel like a winner. It never came. That's the part nobody tells you. Standing up for yourself feels right. Losing a piece of your family feels like a tooth coming out. Both of those are true at the same time, and you just have to hold them both. I closed on the cottage 2 weeks later. It's small, maybe 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, and if you lean a certain way in the kitchen, you can see White Lake through the birches. At my age, I stopped caring about impressive a while ago. I was after peaceful, and I found it. Moving out of the old house about did me in, though. I'd stand in the hallway, where Nathan used to race his Hot Wheels, or run my hand over the pantry door frame where I'd penciled his height every birthday from age 5 to 17. And I'd have to go sit in the truck a minute. Some chapters you have to close even when the closing costs you something. I left the pencil marks on the frame for the new family. It felt wrong to paint over a boy's whole childhood just because the man grew up crooked. That first stretch at the lake was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. I started fishing again, real fishing. Mornings with a thermos and a folding chair down by the water, where I'd catch a smallmouth or catch nothing, and either one was fine. And I started driving over to the vocational center twice a week to volunteer. Showing kids how to true a board, how to read a level, how to keep all their fingers. Those kids reminded me so much of my old crew at Hurt, in a good way. Some were cocky, some were lost. Most of them just needed one grown man to act like they might amount to something. There was one, a quiet kid named Isaiah, stayed after one afternoon to ask me how I got started with nothing. We ended up talking near an hour. Driving home, I realized that for a whole year I'd been so busy protecting what I'd built that I'd forgotten why I built it. That felt like turning a corner. Nathan didn't call. Not in September, not October, not November. Part of me kept bracing for a lawyer's letter, some suit trying to claw the trust open. Get me declared incompetent after all. It never came. Ruth said it wouldn't. I'd made sure of that with a doctor's letter and a clean paper trail. But the bracing is a hard habit to put down. Mostly there was just silence, and the silence hurt worse than a fight would have. Because here's the thing folks miss. Nathan wasn't some villain out of a movie. He was my son. The kid who insisted on wearing his winter boots to a 4th of July parade because he thought they made him look like a fireman. The teenager who cried in the truck the day his mother died and let me hold him, even though he was already too old for it. I couldn't scrub those out of my memory, and I didn't want to. 2-3 times I picked up the phone. 2-3 times I set it back down. Not out of spite, because I knew if that call happened, it had to happen for the right reason, and not out of guilt or fear or somebody wanting something signed. It came the week before Thanksgiving, on a Wednesday night. I was halfway through a frozen dinner and watching the Lions find a new way to lose when the phone lit up with his name. I looked at it a long moment. Then I answered, "Hello?" A few seconds of nothing. Then his voice, smaller than I'd heard it in years. "Hey, Dad." We talked around it at first. The weather, the Lions, whether the lake had frozen yet, the way strangers talk when they used to be family. And then it got where it was going. "I've been in counseling," he said. "Delaney and me, some of it separate." He took a breath. "We were underwater, Dad. On the house, the cars, all of it. Seminar money I never told you about. I told myself the whole thing was about looking out for you. That's the ugly part. I really did tell myself that. I didn't say anything. I've learned that from Corinne. I stopped seeing you as my father somewhere in there," he said, and his voice cracked clean in half. "You turned into a plan, a problem to manage. And I hate that. I hate that I did that." I looked out the window at the dark lake, and I felt something in my chest come loose that had been clenched since March. Not forgiveness, not all the way, but the start of understanding. "I wasn't perfect either," I said, and I meant it. "I should have asked the hard questions years sooner, instead of just missing you and blaming your calendar. And I should have made you know Corinne for who she was, instead of letting you carry that around since you were a kid." He let out a wet little laugh, the first real sound I'd heard from him in months. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "No conditions on it. No but. Just the 3 words." I closed my eyes. I'd pictured that moment more times than I'll admit, and when it finally came, it was smaller than I'd built it up to be, and somehow that made it more real. We talked near an hour. We didn't fix it. You don't fix a year like that in one phone call, and I told him as much. Trust takes a lot longer to rebuild than it takes to knock down. But it was a start. Before we hung up, I told him he could bring Poppy up to the lake over Christmas if he wanted, that I'd like that there was a spot off the dock where the bluegill practically jump into your hands. And I told him one more thing, because I'd been chewing on it a while. "You never lost your dad, son," I said, "but my life was never yours to run." The line was quiet. Then, low, "I know that now." After we hung up, I sat in the dark a good while listening to the ice tick and groan out on the lake, and I thought about Ellen and about what she'd have made of all of it. Probably that families are a mess and love sometimes has to have a fence around it to stay love. I think she'd have been right. I'm 69 years old, and I'll tell you the truest thing I've learned. You can love somebody all the way down to the bottom and still refuse to let them take you apart. Those two things aren't opposites. Most days they're the same job. The best answer I ever gave to being wronged wasn't getting even. It was standing in my own backyard, calm, in the daylight, and refusing to hand over 1 inch of my own dignity until the man who wanted it finally got a good look at what he'd become. Nathan calls now, and when he does, I pick up. And when I drive down to see Poppy, I go because I want to, not because I'm scared of what I'll lose if I don't. That's a healthier place to stand for both of us. If you're out there caught between helping your family and protecting yourself, I hope you hear me on this. You're allowed to do both. And if you've been through something like it, I'd truly like to know how it went for you. Sometimes the only thing that gets a person through the dark stretch is finding out somebody else already walked it and came out the other side.